Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Victorious Ones podcast, the place where gaming meets comics, meets sports, meets movies, as well as inspiration. Of course, I'm your host, King Von Jr. You can follow me on social media on Twitter/X at 301 King Von Jr. You can follow the shows, Twitter/X page at Victory Pod One. I'm also on Instagram at Mr. King Von Jr. You can follow the show's Instagram page at Victorious Ones Podcast. I'm also on YouTube, youtube.com/ at Von Resper Jr. Please make sure to like, subscribe for more great content. And of course, I'm also the social media producer for Monday's Perfect Plex Talk Radio, hosted by a friend of the program, Mike Knox. So, with that being said, first things first, as Biggie would say. This past weekend, was definitely a very, very very special one for me. Pretty significant one for me. Of course, it was, kicked off with, as a matter of fact, matter of fact, um, first and foremost, last week, I was at a concert for my church, you know, but of course on Friday though, another thing we did was evening of elegance for the special needs ministry. It was great night, to celebrate those, with special needs, and just to give them the time to have fun and just to celebrate them and be a blessing to them. You know what I mean? And it's very rewarding. I will say that. And also, that was the same day. It's my mom's birthday, so I know. As a matter of fact, the day after my mom's birthday, I competed in of course, the Washington D.C.'s RnR Marathon. The RnR Marathon here in D.C. And I meant to do a 5K, but got myself turned around, wires crossed or whatever, and I found myself accidentally found myself in the half marathon line, and so all of a sudden, I'm thinking, all right, then I'm just gonna hit these 3 miles and be good to go. Nah, I hit an extra 10, 13.1. Yay, praise God, I made it. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. You know what I mean? So I made sure to endure that race. You know what I mean? And so yeah, that's what it was, and it was very, like I said, it was very remarkable. It was very inspiring, if you will. Um, I've been sore, for quite a few days, um, but yeah, all in all, I'm glad to say that I got a medal. Um, you know what I mean? It's like I said, it was fun. I think we'll go back to doing 5K next year. Make sure that going to the right, going to the right, you know, um, uh, you know, line. Sorry about that. Like I say, next year I'm gonna do the 5K. Make sure make sure I go to the right, right lane, if you will. But yeah, other than that, like I said, it was a fun experience. I had, it was a way for me to explore a part of DC that I never really explored, as far as as far as running and walking. Like all across the area. Uh, just different streets. Places that I normally go to on the metro. And but just to run, just to run and walk through those streets, it was an experience. It was definitely um, eye opening in more ways than one. Uh, climb, as a matter of fact, walking up hills, uh, going across bridges. You want to talk about steps of faith, leaps of faith? That's exactly what that was. Um, and so for that, I am forever grateful. You know what I mean? It's not a game. It's not a game, but you know, uh, by God's favor, I did not pass out. I know I've seen other people that did, like at the end of, like when I was around my 11th or 12th mile, at least. Actually, no, I think it was after, like, around like 12th mile at least. Um, somebody on the right hand side that passed out. I said, "Oh my God!" I said, "Come on, just make it." Thankfully, that was not me at the end. So it was very special. It was very exciting. So I will say that in terms of personal milestones. And so outside of that, I know that especially now when it comes to the NCAA Sweet 16, unfortunately, my Tar Heels got knocked out, because they blew a 19-point lead. So now we have Duke versus St. John's. Um, you know, I'm looking to see St. John's, but uh, because I'm not a Duke fan, so you already know how that is. Whatever, I digress. Um, but yeah, of course, most importantly, um, now it's time to get into the week in wrestling and this road to WrestleMania as we know it. Um, and speaking of WrestleMania, I have been, you know, all right, but yeah, but like I said, when it comes to this road to WrestleMania, it's you know, some of the prospects aren't exactly prospecting, if you will, and there are things that could be better, you know what I mean, and I feel as though, especially when you look at, as a matter of fact, um, this was a conversation that I was a part of even when it came to Black Wrestlers Turnbuckle Talk on Tuesdays, and so I mean, and of course, like what, of course, shout out to DBM, and like I pointed out, the different costs, like how everything adds up, as it pertains to the ticket prices, as it pertains to the hotel, as it pertains to all these extra Las Vegas fees and all these different things. How they overprice and overtax and all these things like that, and taxes are ridiculously high. And like I said, we look at the merch, how the merch isn't exactly merching, if you will. I think they just kind of recycle a few things, but for the most part, um, last year's merchandise blows this year's merchandise out of the water. Puts it to shame. Um, and so when you factor all those things in, especially when it comes to the way that they are playing everybody's face when it comes to these ticket prices, and especially when it comes to um, the resellers, that's a whole different ballgame in and of itself. Because the resellers will double, triple the prices, and that's those are things that they're not they're enough to really turn people away. And so, with all that being said, you're kind of curious as to how they're going to fill that stadium, how they're going to refill Allegiant Stadium. And so, so all these extra things, and also, especially when you consider the lack of presentation, or or the lack of um, production, or at least like the prospects aren't prospecting, meaning that they're not giving you something that's worth charging this much money for. And I would say like this in return, the product is not giving you what what it is that they're charging so much, that you're charging so much for. Now, I will say that it would be best to maximize some of these matches, multi-man, multi-woman matches, whatever the case may be, so that so more people could get their shine on their Mania card. And especially when it comes to the women's tag team champions. And with how much they've invested in Lash Legends, to the point where, like where she hasn't even spent that much time on the main roster. Now she's, of course, now she's a tag champ with Nia, and so I think it'll be better, for them to go into Mania, still holding those titles, because it's great exposure. It's great exposure for Lash, to a much larger audience, for this being the first time, for her just joining the main roster, her first WrestleMania on the main roster. Not only that, but it's definitely a boost for Nia because because ever since she's come back, she's missed back-to-back WrestleManias. Ever since Nia has made a return, and made these significant changes. When she lost significant amount of weight and all, it's improved in the ring and all these different things like that, and just has a second career pretty much. With that, even with all those improvements that she's made in the ring, for back-to-back years, she has been off the main card, WrestleMania 40 and 41. So, and to break that cycle, why not, have her and Lash, of course, going to Mania as tag champions. I think it would be better for them to retain the tag titles themselves. But that should, other than that, I digress. But yeah, like I say, it's just for them to get the most out of that roster. I think that would definitely, that's one of the things that would help. Implement some ladder matches, if you will. Excuse me. But yeah, you know what I mean. So like I said, implement some ladder matches. Excuse me. But yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, like I said, implement that, and also like how even last year, I'm not always the biggest proponent, of multi-man, multi-women matches, especially when it comes to the main event. But they really pulled it off very well, and so especially as far as last year's, especially when it comes to last year's night one main event, and the way they pulled it off spectacularly. Roman, Seth, and Punk, and they pulled a miracle out of that match. I mean, that was tremendous. So that was a great night one main event, and they also followed it up with with a triple threat match, triple threat women's match to kick off night two. So I was like, all right, I see how they put back to back, triple threat matches. One being the main event for night one, and then the other one, of course, the other one kicking off night two, and that women's triple threat was definitely main event caliber, but because but because it was Cena's last Mania, and it was his time to break Flair's record, of course that was going to be number one priority right there. Cena, Cena making history, that was going to be the number one priority right there. But yeah, like I said, as far as that, and also even with even with the IC title, that Fatal 4-Way match, of course we saw Dom Mysterio win, and of course by pinning Finn Balor. So that was long-term storytelling, long-term booking, going eventually spilling over into what we see now. So as far as that, and especially when it comes to someone like Penta, he is definitely more than deserving of a spot on the Mania card. I mean, for crying out loud, this dude is the Intercontinental Champion, so why not, right? So I could definitely see something with him. When it comes to defending this title, and so we already know that we have Finn versus Dom. Finn versus Dom. As Dom has been, finally spread, as Finn can finally spread his wings and finally got the Judgment Day. You know what I mean? So, So as far as that's concerned, and yeah, pretty much just observing the complexion of, of this year's Mania, and with with very little time left, and of course have to make the most out of it, and obviously when it comes to what we've seen out of Open versus Brock. So, matter of fact, I'm really starting to watch, WrestleMania 17 right now, anyway, and and plus it's part of my WrestleMania uh, marathon, if you will. So, I've already seen, it's like WrestleMania 10, 12, 13, 14. So now I'm on 17. I'm very selective in terms of which WrestleManias, I want to watch. Certain ones, I just want to go ahead and just sort of get out of the way. But yeah, Mania 17 is right there. Is like my best, Manias ever, if not number one. But I digress. And side note, very soon I'm going to um, come up with a new WrestleMania ranking system. So I have written um, an article about about like my top 40 WrestleMania matches of all time. I know after last year, I updated, right? And I've done other uh, projects as pertains to Mania. I've had different ideas. I've ranked my top 10 Undertaker Mania matches, my top 10 Shawn Michaels Mania matches. I've done top 10 Mania matches. Period. Like whatever it is you name, I always look for a way to really shake things up. And so I think this idea is I think this one is gonna be pretty different. You know what I mean? And I'm going to see how this format is really going to play out. But yeah, as it pertains to the current state of WrestleMania, um, now that of course they're at a point where they really have to you know pull some type of miracle out of this. Because I know that there are a lot of people who are very jaded, no pun intended, to Jade Cargill. Of course, I'm very jaded as it pertains to their excitement, for WrestleMania, and especially when it comes to someone like Mike. Um, and he's been, a WWE defender, aficionado, connoisseur, if you will, for the longest time. There's been very much a pro WWE podcast, for as long as I've known. Now the tide's starting to change where he's giving more reviews and stuff to AEW. I said, oh my gosh, like they're really, one of some of the best fans away. But yeah, and of course we'll see, as it pertains to, as it pertains to Jade and Rhea. And of course we saw that Rhea got jumped by Jade's baddies, so Jade's recreated, the baddie section in WWE this time, and of course this time we have B-Fab and Meech, and people are people are curious as to why they're in the group. Um, I mean, for one, um, as soon as Jade, as soon as Jade got into the door, she was part of a faction, pretty much faction adjacent, if you will. This pertains to the big three, and of course with her, Bianca and Naomi. Jade's first Mania match was, was a 6-woman tag. I mean, so it's like the big three, and so yeah, so she's, not new to this, and the only reason why, I think the biggest reason why she went with, with Meech and Big Fab was, because yeah, the other two from the main big three are out. So Jay doesn't have a whole lot of options, because her two, because her two best dance partners are sidelined. One is pregnant, the other one's injured. You know, um, you know, uh, one has a baby on the way. The other one is pretty much had, I mean, got what I like to call a damaged claw, pretty much, and so yeah, so with that being said, there's very little that Jade maybe has around her, and I firmly believe if the other the other members of the big three um, were still in that locker room, then this whole internet tirade and exchange between her, Rhea, um, you know Chelsea and all of them, that wouldn't even be a conversation right now. This wouldn't even be a conversation if the Queen of Caution and the EST were still in the locker room. But I digress. Here we are right now. So yeah, so as far as that's concerned, of course, as far as that's concerned, that's where we are, and of course, we see that that Randy Orton, continues to go nuclear and just went off on Matt Cardona, formerly known as Zack Ryder. I was like that was hilarious, and I celebrate, I cheer. You know what I mean? Anytime Orton starts to hear those voices, and just just goes nuclear. He just goes scorched earth, and that's what he does best. And it's Bradshaw just Godfather but yeah, like I said, as far as that, watching maybe 17 right now. That's the reason why said that, but yeah, what I mean, it's crazy. Next week exactly is going to be 25 years since WrestleMania 17. I'm watching a week ahead of time, but hey, whatever, neither here nor there. But yeah, but of course, like I said, Randy Orton, doing what Orton does best, and I like how how they have how they marketed this whole thing, especially after Orton beat Cody so bad he made him bleed, and how Orton smeared the blood on his shirt, on the word everybody. And so this past week we saw Orton, with another RKO Everybody shirt, and this time it got blood printed on there. And so that was WWE's marketing strategy. I said, I see what you did. I see what you did right there. I like it. That's very clever. So yeah, what I mean. So the thing is, Orton is the bad guy that is just too cool for you to hate. And people have waited and waited and waited for vintage '09 Orton. So and just like I said on Twitter, Randy Orton committed war crimes like 2009, 2017. This is the violence that I live for. This is the game that I love. You know what I mean? When I see Orton going off like that, to paraphrase Mark Jackson, this is what happened to the game I love. And I'm all for it. You know what I mean? More Orton war crimes. Let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. Speaking of war crimes, we're going to Monday Night Raw, and what I mean. So of course, like I said, there's several of them. Obviously, as it pertains to so obviously as it pertains to to Brock Lesnar and Oba Femi, and how Oba got the best of Brock, not once but twice, and I know Twitter definitely went off into a frenzy when Brock called Oba boy. Especially with the conversation behind it. So I definitely get it, but I'm not making excuses for it. But at the same time, this company has done way worse. They've said way worse. Like, so this is like at the bottom of the totem pole, pretty much, as it pertains to um, this company being an equal opportunity offender. Like, come on now, we've seen more egregious stuff than that. I mean, like obviously, um, whether it was DX doing that minstrel show, wearing blackface, making fun of the nation, making fun of the nation. Um, you know, Triple H telling Booker T to dance for him. All those things. Triple H and Katie Vick. Do I need to even go any further? I mean, you can even go back to the stuff back in back like the '80s and early '90s or whatever. The stuff that that Vince greenlit, like like this is like I said, they've done way worse, more obvious things. So it's just like you said like this, like whatever. Um, and so it's so as far as that, um, Oba, like I said, definitely got the best of Brock this time. Of course at TD Garden in Boston, and next week is going to be in Madison Square Garden. So chances are, Brock end up getting the upper hand in that exchange. And what else? Vision has been losing his sight. um, and so even Heyman knows that he's pretty much, stuck with a bunch of losers. At this point, he's pretty much been reduced so bad, it's insane. And this past Monday, it was definitely a Monday of violence, if you will, especially with especially with Paul Heyman calling the cops on Seth Rollins, and and it's funny how Paul said he came from a family of snitches, and he was going to make sure that Seth gets locked up, and that some other wrestlers, of course, other wrestlers in the locker room go after his wife, and that and that Heyman was gonna adopt Seth's daughter, and so that's where Seth just lost right there. That's where he drew the line. He just unleashed on Heyman. I'm like, man, Paul Heyman's definitely taking some hits on this one. You know what I mean? And so, but yeah, like I said, it's definitely gonna heat up, and more than likely, I'm looking at it to be Seth Rollins versus Logan Paul at WrestleMania. That's the way I see it at this point. Because the Vision, has been walking around with no sight at this point now. And so, so as far as that's concerned, very much a lot remains to be seen. And so, so apparently, Bailey and Lyra wants to start. Bailey and Lyra, of course, beat Oscar and Kyrie. So I like qualifying match or something. So so of course they called out the women's tag champs, Lash Legend and Nia Jax. And I will say that Bailey's promos give off Surfer Sting 80s vibes. That's really what it what it comes across comes across as. As for me as I'm watching. Of course, no offense to to Pam Martinez, but I'm just saying like it does feel that way. So we see that Gunther is still without a WrestleMania opponent. So apparently, apparently he's run out of legends to retire at this point. And speaking of, and by the way, as far as Hall of Fame, congratulations, congratulations to Psycho Sid, R.I.P. to Sid Beauty, aka Sid Justice, Sid Vicious, Psycho Sid. He's going to the Hall of Fame posthumously, and Dennis Rodman is going to the Hall of Fame obviously on the celebrity wing because of his because of his affiliation with the NWO. You know, I mean, even without ever stepping foot in a WWE ring, but whatever. Like that's a fixture when it comes to the Hall of Fame celebrity wing. And speaking of celebrities, Cyndi Lauper should have been in the Hall of Fame a long time ago. But whatever, I digress. We also saw, saw, continue to see the bad blood. So we continue to see the bad blood between Liv and Stephanie, and that segment right there, I was like, that's getting me even more invested. I mean, as invested with with the women's world championship, because they are, putting everything into this. So I definitely like the way that they turn the heat up with that. See, let's see her Raquel, sizing up Io as well. You know what I mean? I was like, all right then, see this turned out to be. But the main focus I want to talk about is this Roman Reigns and CM Punk segment this week, and how Punk talks about how proud he is to be old, proud to be old, proud to be old, and he still has still has something left in the tank, all these different type of things, to tell people not to count him out as an old man, it's just like pretty much like whatever. But at the same time, this was the same dude last week, who popped off on Roman as soon as Roman called him old. But yet fast forward the next week, you're celebrating, celebrating being the old man of the locker room. So it's very fickle, like dude, make up your mind. And the thing is, CM Punk is a reflection of some of the worst parts of the IWC. Obviously, obviously being fickle, being cynical, just being really jaded and very pessimistic. A guy who's a rage bait, and we certainly saw that on Monday. So so especially with the way that he was triggering the Usos, especially Jey Uso, and Jimmy was the one who's got to be the voice of reason, to really talk Jey down, like, look, you don't need to do this. And so, like I say, like I said, the thing is, Punk is just continuous rage baiter and antagonizer, and he does all this type of stuff just so that he can spin the narrative in his favor, that Roman always needs help. But this is originally going to be one-on-one, but Punk was the one, who keeps bringing Roman's family into this. Keeps bringing up Roman's family into this. Especially talking about Roman's dad, RIP to Seeker. So as far as that, and at that point, that's when you really make it personal, especially when you know that family's an army. Like, come on now. So so if anything, this blood is on Punk's hands. Had he not brought up Roman's dead father, then this wouldn't even be a conversation. Usos would be like, you know what, look, it's on use, pretty much, and but because Punk found a way, to drag everybody else into this, and continuously point at Roman as a guy that can't do things on his own. That's the side of the equation that people choose to ignore. And so as Jey was going after Punk, Punk attacked Jey. Roman hit Punk, of course, Roman hit Punk with the Superman punch. But even before that, when Roman came out, he told them to stand down. You know, um, but like I said, Punk being a master agitator, it's like, you know what, enough is enough. And that's where Roman had to go in and really fight for his family's honor, like he always does. And especially with the way that he powerbombed Punk through the announce table. I said, Punk had it coming. Punk had it coming. I mean, like, yeah, he definitely earned that. He definitely deserved that beatdown. Once again, CM Punk is a reflection of the IWC. He uses their same talking points. And the thing is, the funny thing about it is that no matter how much this happened repeatedly, even this week, no matter how much CM Punk goes out of his way, to try to get the fans to boo Roman, the fans cheer Roman, and Punk even, it's gonna be fun. And the thing is, Punk even asked the fans if they think he's old, and the fans like, yes, resounding yes. And I'm pretty sure Punk is beside himself because he's doing everything he can to turn the crowd against Roman, but it's not working for him. It's falling on his face. And I don't know if Punk realizes it, but he's definitely lost his grip from what from before. He's really been been losing his grip on on a lot of the fan base, and he's got to realize that that those same 2011 talking points are not going to work anymore. Because a lot of Punk's material comes from those 2011 pipe bomb talking points, the IWC talking points, as it pertains to Roman, not having what it takes to do things on his own, and how he's overpushed and all this other type of stuff. And Punk is delusional to think that he can even compete with Roman as an athlete. Like, come on now, Roman clears him in each and every way. If it were any other scenario, I would be more of a CM Punk guy, but because of this, because because this situation, and because of because of who Punk's going up against, I can't let it slide, because I defend Roman each time I get a chance on this podcast. Excuse me. It's because whatever he does is under a microscope. Excuse me. And it's just like, I get it that that Roman is the face of the company and all all these things like that, but I feel as though he's under a much harsher judgment and scrutiny. Of course, like I said, once again, even though he is the face of this era and and everything like that, but and the thing about it is that of course, nothing against Big E, but there was a take that he had that I can't quite go for, because he was saying that Roman is always the thing about Roman. Hey, what's up, Mimi? All right now, see, you know it. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you so much. Shout out to Mimi from Black Wrestling Friendly Program. But yeah, with that being said, like I said, one of the points that he was talking about, this is no shade on him, but about this narrative, about how Roman, always always needs somebody, always needs help, and and needs some type of assistance, And he was saying, that after WrestleMania, we have to, start questioning Roman's legacy. Not so much of it taking a hit, but start to question things. And I'm saying to myself, as I said before on Twitter, I would hope that you give Ric Flair the same energy, because much of his legacy has been tied to the Four Horsemen. Much of his affiliation, like I said, much of his greatness has usually been affiliated with the group. The COO himself, Paul Levesque, or Triple H, he's been affiliated with two factions. You know what I mean? And so, so him and Roman are pretty much, are going to be 3-time Hall of Famers. Might as well say Flair too. Are going to end up being 3-time Hall of Famers. Because of their own individual career, and also what they've done with the two factions that they've been in. Of course, Triple H by himself, he's already in DX, and then when Evolution goes in, Flair's already in by himself along with the Horsemen. He's going to go in Evolution also. I hate that they right now. What's up? Mimi says, I hate that they push that narrative like we haven't been watching all this time. It's clear Roman didn't ask them for help. They made it clear they were in Punk's face for the disrespect. Exactly. My point exactly. Right. And see, Mimi and I, great minds think alike. We had the same wavelength when it comes to our way of thinking as it pertains to Roman. Both of us are Team Roman. It's just it's almost like we're pretty much thinking the same thing. Almost like some X-Men telepath type of thing. It's crazy, right? But the thing about it is that the thing about it is that Roman didn't ask for their assistance. They got in Punk's face because Punk agitated them. Punk is an agitator, and so for people to to fall for these talking points, to fall for this narrative, to me, respectfully, is absurd. Because Roman has proven. He has proven that he can win matches and get things done without assistance. And last time I checked, Survivor Series 2021, Roman had a match with aforementioned E, and there was no assistance from the Usos. And Roman won that match clean. Roman has won matches clean, without their help. He's won match with Kevin Owens, matches, with Riddle, Edge, Bryan, Cena. You know what I mean? So Roman has proven that he can do it. And so, absolutely. Come on now. Like let's see the second half of Roman's reign. Really, it's just like, people have gotten so much stuff distorted, especially once they saw, like more of these run-ins, in the latter half of Roman's reign as champion, instead of looking at the whole picture. It's not like, Roman, is this helpless, being, that needs all this help and all this assistance and things like that. And so people, questioning, question, who will Roman be without the bloodline? Who will Roman be without the Shield? And shout out to O'Shea Jackson Jr. He said it perfectly. Without the Shield, Roman has been a multi-time world champion. Without the bloodline, Roman has been a Grand Slam champion. So we put it this way: Roman Reigns will be a three-time Hall of Famer. One with the Shield, one with the bloodline, and one off his own merit. It's not a foreign concept, right? There have been plenty of legends who have gone to the Hall of Fame, both by themselves and with the group. Bret Hart went to the Hall of Fame first by himself, then and of course then with the Hart Foundation, and now third time because of that Stone Cold match, but whatever. Shawn Michaels went to the Hall of Fame multiple times. First on his own merit, and another time with DX. Are we taking points away from them? So we were talking about, right? Hogan, of course, went on his own, and then the second time with the NWO, things like that. Are we going to start playing this game where we are deducting points from people's legacy because they were in a group? And last time I checked, another thing also. Last time I checked, CM Punk, Punk himself had two groups: Straight Society and Nexus 2.0. And Punk has had help, during his matches, from those groups as well. So let's not act like Punk was completely a lone wolf this whole time. It's just that the groups that he was leading did not move the needle like that. So I'm sure he's feeling some type of way about that himself. So you know what I mean. It's and so like I said, as far as that, and by the way, when it comes to the New Day, all of them are going to go into the Hall of Fame more than once. One for their own individual merit, and another as a group. So if anybody, would have experience as it pertains for being in those shoes, he would know better than anybody else. And this don't slight to him, but this has been a recurring narrative as it pertains to Roman's career. Roman doesn't need to have his legacy questioned. Roman has earned the right to control his narrative, because there have been people on this app before it became X, when it was OG Twitter, that was celebrating when Roman, they were celebrating when Roman announced he had cancer. There were people on here that that were celebrating Roman's cancer announcement and talking about how they think that wrestling would improve when he's not around. This is the sicko behavior and attitude and mindset of the IWC. And I'm gonna say it like this: if y'all thought Ricochet's crash out was bad on IWC, you better be glad that Roman takes the high road and keeps it dignified and keeps it reserved online. Because if he really wanted to, you want to talk about going Scorched Earth, Roman would burn the IWC down if he really, really let off how he felt. So, a lot of people better be grateful that Roman, takes, uses Michelle Obama's advice of when they go low, he goes high. He goes sky high when a lot of people take it to hell. So, come on now, so for people, that want to try to question, Roman's merit and Roman's place in history and all these other things, absolutely not. Absolutely not. We're not going to go there. We're not going to go there. Roman, within the first 500 days, I was more impressed within the first 500 days of him as champion than what I saw out of 434 days of Punk. And a lot of Punk's bitterness comes from the fact that, that they saw someone like Roman, be picked by Vince, and the funny thing is, Punk was trained by Sika himself, and you see, Sika's son, be next in line, and you feel jaded, just by his presence. Punk's a guy that, that has, that was disrespecting Roman, probably, even before he even met the guy. You know what I mean? And they even disrespect him even further after he left the company. So, and the thing about it is that the only way that CM Punk was able to afford being in a WrestleMania main event back-to-back times is because of Roman Reigns. If Punk was as great as as he likes to, proclaim himself to be, then he would have been in the main event during that 434-day title reign. He would have been in the main event when he was at the top of his game during his best years. And so, he's still holding on to that. It's the equivalent of somebody who peaked in like high school or college, and they're still holding on to that. That's what Punk is doing. And he can't grasp the fact that, you have someone who has cleared him, from all-time legacy standpoint, in a shorter span of time. The fact that Punk pretty much had a 7-year head start on Roman. And Roman found a way to eclipse him. And I use it like this. I'm going to use a basketball analogy. It's like Giannis eclipsing guys like James Harden and CP3 in a shorter span of time. They may have longer careers, but they don't have the accolades that he has. He's checked off boxes that they never did. Same thing goes with Roman. And it eats Punk alive. And it eats up, those among the IWC and a lot of Roman's detractors. It eats them up alive, and they can't handle it. So, like you really, if anything, I make no apologies, about it. Shout out to Mimi, of course, a friend of the program for chiming in. Because we both, have the same, ideas and thought patterns and, and viewpoints about Roman, And so, but yeah, so as far as that, when it comes to this podcast, yeah, Roman's one of those guys on my list that I defend. I have a select list of wrestlers and even athletes that I'm not going to have no slander about. And Roman's in that conversation. I mentioned that list over and over. Roman, New Day, Bianca, Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, Rock, Austin, those are the ones. You know what I mean? The Horsewoman, of course. You know what I mean? Like Roman is in that category where time out. We ain't going there with that. We ain't going there. But yeah, that's really what it is. And so, what I mean? Like I say, Roman Reigns is his career is ironclad. There's nothing to question. There's nothing to discredit. All right. Whoever feels the type of way, let them feel the type of way. And that's all there is to it. But with that being said, of course, it's time to, to give my birthday shout outs. So this, of course, this past Monday, of course, Shaka Khan turned 73 on March 23rd. Moses Malone, basketball legend, would have turned 71 on that same day. Fellow Hall of Famer Jason Kidd, of course, turned 53. Kyrie Irving turned 34. Of course, on March 24th, The Undertaker turned 61. Peyton Manning turned 50. Lana turned 41. On this very day, March 25th, the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin, would turn 84. Of course, Sir Elton John turned 79. Cheryl Swoops turns 55. That's March 25th. On March 26th, quite a big one right here. Steven Tyler of Aerosmith turned 78. Teddy Pendergrass would turn 76. Of course, comedy legend Martin Short turned 76 as well. Marcus Allen turned 66. Diana Ross, of course, turns 82. Ari Lennox turns 35. John Stockton, turned 64, and that's all on March 26th. March 27th, Randall Cunningham turns 63. Of course, Mariah Carey turns 57, and on March 28th, of course, Mr. Perfect will turn 68. And so that's it. And of course, that's it for the birthdays. And before I go, I would like, of course, before I go, I like to give a word of wisdom. And the thing about it is that God has given us more than one purpose, and of course, we're called to make a difference, and of course, He's called us, He's given us time, to do so, and so that's really what it is. And of course, you're victorious, and of course, also remember, you're victorious because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. When you put God in first place, you don't have to worry about being in last place. Please make sure to listen to this podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, YouTube. You know what I mean? Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching. And may this day be the absolute very best day of your